Okay, hello. My name is Juan Pablo Astolfo, JP. I am from Argentina and I'm living in London yeah, for the last 2 years. My background is in public policy. I worked for the Buenos Aires City government for many years, and I'm working for the Greater London Authority in economic development.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, JP. Really, really good to have you with us. James, shall we come to your lovely self next, and then we'll go to Veronique.
So I'm James. Am I on?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So hi guys, I'm James. I'm 19. I've been born and raised here in the UK. Currently, I'm kind of working as like an entrepreneur slash events manager. Currently working in nightclub in Tunbridge Wells and a waiter at the Ivy Asia Chelsea. So yeah.
Fantastic. You're a good man to know, James. Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. And Veronique, how about yourself?
Hiya, my name is Veronique Mosgalo. I work at the London School of Economics. I'm their business continuity manager. Before that, I've had quite a varied career, always in admin through sort of public and also through private bodies as well. Have no connection to mining, I have to say. Although it might come up later in the conversation, when I was a teenager, my family did emigrate to South Africa. So there we go, that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Veronique. So actually, well, let's kick off and start with yourself, Veronique. So having grown up a lot in South Africa, and don't worry, everyone's being spotlit at the moment. So having grown up a little bit in South Africa, I suspect that when somebody says the words mining to you, something quite specific comes to your mind. So when I say the word mining, what comes to mind? And then James, I'll come to you next, and then AP, I'll come on to yourself.
What comes to my mind is the slag heaps outside of Johannesburg when I was a child and we used to drive in. What also comes to mind is exploitation of poor people. Very much so, the hundreds of thousands of lives, particularly in South Africa, that were lost through mining, both gold and diamonds. My father worked for Hayfelt Steel and Vanadium. So I can remember as a kid, particularly in the summer, in the evenings, we might occasionally drive past it and it looked like something out of Dante's Inferno because it was lit up with orange lights, and then quite often you would have bushfires going on, and it just looked like the lower circle of, circle of hell, quite frankly. So I have a very sort of specific connotation. It's also slightly kind of also flavoured by the fact that I am actually originally from the Lake District, and I can remember as a child sort of being driven around and seeing these horrendous scars on the landscape from open cast mining as well. So yes, you're right, I have a very specific view of it.
But it's a very powerful image that you have there in your mind. Thanks for that, Veronique. James, I know that you're taking a sip of your tea, but what comes to mind when somebody says mining to you? And then we'll go to JP. So
it's kind of like a very similar vibe. So my kind of generation, the way that we kind of see mining, especially with resources, is just outright bad, but I feel like people don't really do the deeper thinking about the topic simply because it's become so heavily politicized. It's kind of like any mining for non-renewable resources is automatically bad, but at the same time, it's a vital part and cog in a machine, which is, our society, and, they don't necessarily think of the consequences that we would encounter if, we just went straight to no mining or anything like that. So I feel like, I don't have a lot of knowledge on the topic, but I think the reality is it's a lot more balanced than we like to admit. And I think, with the right attitudes and the right changes, things can become a lot more responsible. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, James. And JP, how about yourself?
Well, I am from Argentina, and the feeling over there I have about mining is basically like the contrast between something that we feel is underdeveloped in our country, that we have a big potential for, but at the same time, the problems with the impact, and immediately comes the image, the argument about water and problems related with water, and also with native population, with the people living from pre-colonization times, and arguments related with their lands and their right to their lands, and relationship with big international corporations, and all those kind of tensions. So the opportunity for development, a natural resource, and tensions between the land and the people of there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, JP. So, okay, so we've heard your initial thoughts with regards to this. Now, I have a feeling that I know what your answers are going to be to this next question. But as we found last year, sometimes the simplest questions are perhaps the most powerful. James, I'm going to come to you first. In your opinion, is mining good or bad? And then Veronique, I'll come to yourself.
Oh boy. It's not really like a definitive answer, you know. It's kind of like a necessary evil. That's kind of the way that I see it to a certain extent. It's really tricky, you know, like because there are two sides to the argument, right? So the way that I see it, you've got big companies, you've got conglomerates, you've got companies like Apple, you've got companies like Tesla. And essentially the entire business model is based off making the old model of tech redundant and then pushing consumers towards buying the latest model and upgrading and all of this kind of stuff. Now, the thing is, this progression is linear. You know, we don't like to think it's linear, but it really is. Because the point is, if we're not reusing the tech that we've already produced, right, that's just going into landfill. I'm not knowledgeable enough to tell you where that's going, and I won't pretend like I am. But the point is, I think that we should be reusing tech instead of trying to, you know, mine for more precious earths and stuff like that. And in fact, that's what my company's about. It's kind of about taking old things and then reusing them. So I think that's one side of the argument, right? And under that light, mining is bad. But under the other light, right, it's kind of like, okay, but to a certain extent, we live lives of luxury. Most, you know, this is a general assumption, but in the Western world, we do. And in fact, the reason we can live these lives of luxury is because we do mine for resources and stuff like this. And, you know, it's used to create different products and services. And a lot of us aren't prepared to sacrifice the lives that we live purely because we've gotten comfortable with it. So on that side, you know, given that most people don't want to go back to the Stone Age, you know, we will have to keep mining, and we will have to try and find a way to mitigate the negative consequences and at the same time increase the positives. So yeah.
Fantastic. Thanks, James. And by the way, you're getting some very positive comments coming through in chat. So brilliant. Veronique, how about yourself? And then we'll go to JP.
Okay. I think that James actually said it right. It is a necessary evil. You know, I've got a smartphone, copper, manganese, you know, cobalt. They're in my phone. I'm wearing a golden diamond ring. You know, I'm speaking on a laptop. I'm looking out of my window out to sea, and there is a wind farm out there which will be built with materials that were mined. It is a necessary evil. But I think the way that certainly the perception that I get of the way that we have been pursuing mining and are doing it at the moment needs to change. Otherwise, it is a bad thing.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Veronique. And JP, how about yourself?
Well, I don't think it's good or bad. I think it's a way of extracting a non-renewable resource, and technology is a blessing for humankind. It's something that we can use. It's a force of good, and I don't think it's something necessarily evil. It's what we do with it, and definitely sometimes the lives of luxury that we live are kind of an excess. So maybe we need to use a cell phone, but do we need to change to iPhone 13, 14, 15, etc.? Is that a need, or what do we do it? So it's not all. Also, it's not the problem with the mining, but also with the business models we build on top of these technologies and the lives and the way we live our lives and we consume. So yeah, it's not necessarily bad.
Fantastic. Thank you, JP. So a question to all of you, and you can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So thumbs up if any of you have ever knowingly been to a mine site. So all of
kind of.
Yeah, on you go, Veronique.
Well, you got to remember, my dad worked for Hyfort Steel and Vanadium. I had friends who lived in Botswana who worked at the mines in Jwaneng. And obviously I've driven over slag heaps. So I've not actually been in a mine, but I have been in proximity to them. I know what they look like.
Okay, great. And JP, what was the mine that you've been into, or mines?
I've been to Potosi, which is in Bolivia. It's one of the biggest, you probably know, you're from the sector, one of the biggest silver mines. And I got into the hole, like 2 kilometers into the mountain, walking in the little holes with a little light, as and stay where the miners in the colonization times stay for 2 months inside the mountain. They didn't let them out there because they were extracting silver. So yeah, really a really shocking experience.
So actually, so the first mine that I ever went into was Potosi. And it's this amazing mountain in Bolivia, as JP has just said, which is well, it's artisanal, and it's artisanal mining, really, isn't it? And you go in there and you're given, you know, your hard hat with your light on the front, and you get asked to take some coca leaves and some very, very, very high proof alcohol, basically as offerings, but then also the coca leaves to actually keep you going because you're at altitude, etc., and you are crawling through very small spaces. When you think of mining, JP, is that what comes to mind? So being there in Potosi, or is it do you have a different impression of the sector?
I don't think I see like kind of exploitation from corporations, government powers to other groups of people. It's not like I see it in mining, like mining is the problem, but through the colonizations and in that time when the natives were pushed into the mountain to stay 2 months working, that's a human thing. It's like it's a power thing. It's not about mining or the technology. But of course, the sector is what they used to do that, and now they do it something in the same line. But yeah, of course, it's related to all that social and political structures.
Brilliant, thank you, JP. And James, what was your mine like?
So it definitely wasn't an active mine, but I've been to a couple of quarries. So there's literally my grandpa owns a factory in Gunnislake, and there's a quarry right next to it, pretty much. And I remember just getting out the car, having a little walk around, and the only thing I know about the mine is that there was a leak, and in fact, all of the arsenic went straight into I can't remember. I think it was into the water supply. So yeah, it was a bit of a mess up. So yeah, that's kind of my only experience with it, really. But yeah.
Okay. Brilliant. So all of these stories as well, they're quite, I mean, they're very powerful stories. And I think this takes us into my next question. I'm sure you've heard of the term NIMBY, so not in my backyard, or the next rung on from that, banana, which I love, which is build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. So that is something where, and I know that whilst we've got experience from all around the world, the three of you anyway are all in London right this second. So from a European perspective, that NIMBY is certainly very much entrenched. Veronique, I don't know if from your perspective, and I know you spent a lot of time in Spain as well, is there anything that a mining company could do to actually make you think, well, actually, I'd be quite happy to have a mine in my back garden or somewhere close to me? Or would it be a case of absolutely not, I don't want it anywhere near me?
I think it depends on the practices of the mine itself. The issues I have are with exploitation, not only of resources, and obviously sustainability. We are approaching a point with our planet where we will not be able to go backward. And I think there's a big role for mining in that. I see a lot of, obviously I read the press and things like that. And what comes over overwhelmingly is that wealthy corporations go into poor countries and exploit their materials. So you have a situation, for instance, was it a few years ago in Peru, where the government, because the economy was growing by 6%, actually outlawed protests by the local community who were poor or concerned about the land that they would subsist on. And then you sort of start to get into the realm of private armies and things like that in very poor communities. So those would be some of the things I would be concerned about, and the scarring on the landscape, because I've seen it. I've seen open cast mining. I've seen what happens sort of like in South Africa. And so that I would not, I'll be honest with you, that I would not want on my doorstep, quite frankly. If there was a sustainable way to do it, and if the company was responsible and actually invested in its local community and did the right thing, then you know what, there might be a case where I could be persuaded.
Fantastic. Thanks, Veronique. James, how about yourself?
To be quite honest, I mean, since I live in London and there are like ice walls coming up left, right and centre, and I'll just be completely honest with you, I wouldn't really care or even notice if there was a mine right next to me, just as long as like I wasn't directly affected in terms of like my water supply getting, you know, getting intoxicated, or just any not intoxicated, polluted, sorry. But yeah, as long as I didn't suffer any direct consequences from that, and as long as, say, if I lived in the countryside though, then I'd have something to say about it, because again, I do like to, you know, go out and about. I do like to go on my walks, and if they completely wreck the landscape, I wouldn't be too happy. But yeah, I think as a Londoner, I don't think most millennials would even notice, to be quite frank. But yeah, it's kind of that's another really interesting thing, which I know it's a little bit off topic, but I feel like most people are kind of so against this sort of thing almost because they want to embody that they want to be on the right side of politics almost, and it's kind of like they get behind this to sort of say to other people, oh, look at me, I'm so morally virtuous, to a certain degree, when in reality, like, they're not actually that passionate about it. And it's something really interesting that I see. And it's something which I see which divides a lot of us in terms of like the political spectrum. And it's something that we need to face in order to get over these problems. But yeah.
So just to pick up on that then, James, so with regards to perhaps some of the trends of what people find themselves supporting, etc., where do you think mining sits in that? Do you think, but yeah, I'll just let you answer that. Where do you think mining sits?
So I mean, again, like most people my age, we're kind of like, you know, Extinction Rebellion, all of that kind of stuff. People were fighting for the cause, but I'll be completely honest with you, most people were going to the protest simply to skip school. You know, it wasn't really, and you know, that doesn't speak for everyone. There are some environmentalists in my age group who are truly passionate about it and do truly want to make a change. But I feel like it's their actions are kind of ineffective or inefficient simply because they don't know enough about the topic, and they aren't talking to professionals or people, experts in the industry, and we're not actually coming to any, you know, definitive, conclusive solutions to the problems that people might be identifying. It's just so political that it's black and white, you know. It's we either do this or we don't do this. It's not how can we find a middle way, and it's for me, it's always the middle way most of the time that's the right solution. So yeah.
Thank you for that, James. JP, what do you think?
Yeah, so about the NIMBY situation, and to be honest, in Argentina, the opposition to mining and to mining activities is mainly from environmental groups and people that maybe have an understanding of what is going on and what are the impacts of these activities, and sometimes people that oppose to the business model of selling or giving these places to foreigner companies to extract the materials. But then what you find nowadays, or I've heard from friends that have visited towns that live out of mining activities, is that people are really happy because mining companies pay really good wages to them. And I've been told, it's not my experience, but I've been told it's kind of pact of silence in the town. So you get into town and nobody would say nothing bad about the mining company because everybody is on the payroll somehow. Or they either win or work for them or indirectly benefit from the activity. So I don't know if it's good or bad, but people over there just live of mining activity. So I'm not that opposed to the activity happening, and more like environmental, and people from big cities or people informed are opposed to the economic side or environmental side of the thing.
Great, thanks for that. Thanks for that, JP. And I'm loving that whole concept of the code of silence because
Yeah.
everybody's got something to gain. And I don't know, Veronique, going back to your days in South Africa, do you think there was a code of silence?
Oh,
or...
like an omerta. I think it's actually a really interesting point that you've raised. When I was a kid, I lived in Witbank. So obviously you had high positive inflammation, which I've already referred to, but you also had Rand carbide, and at night I would fall asleep to the sound of the train sort of chugging along the tracks with their sort of like, you know, carts full of rubble and what have you. And I think that in South Africa, it was a very different demographic. You've got to remember these were the years of apartheid. This was the 80s. And so what would happen is you had a very wealthy white population who, didn't really talk about mining at all. They would talk about their swimming pools and who was having a swinging party next door and how shocking and scandalous it all was and all the rest of it, you know, all the stuff that expats talk about. And they did very, very nicely off it. They went to their golf clubs and they had their sort of like, you know, clubs where they get drunk and play cricket and all the rest of it. But then you had 10,000 workers who were black and who lived in shanty towns. And I know this because when I was a kid, I ended up being a cub reporter, believe it, of all things. And I went out for the day with the police and I was taken to the nearby township that supplied the workers for these places. And they lived in abject poverty. So I think it's kind of a very interesting kind of analogy to draw. And yes, you are right, JP, there is a code of silence amongst the people who are doing very well out of it. But I think it's a very different matter for the people who are doing less well out of it. And that's kind of probably one of the issues, probably one of the reasons why I have such strong opinions about it, to be honest.
Thanks for that, Veronique. And I guess we're building on what you're saying there. So the title of the conference that we're running this week is all about the just transition. Now, the just transition means something different to everybody, I think. So, Veronique, what does the just energy transition mean to you? And then, JP, I'll come to you next.
How do you mean in terms of like justice or?
Yeah, so if somebody says to you, we're talking about the just transition today, what comes to mind? And this builds on a talk that we heard yesterday, where Emily had actually gone to some of the people in her bubble and said just transition, and some people had given very eloquent answers, and other people had talked about the transitions in triathlons, for example. So it means something very different to different people.
I'm not sure it means anything, honestly. I think we live in a world of spin and propaganda. And I think that people say all sorts of things and they come up with all sorts of phrases and they don't actually mean anything. And so I'm of the age now where I actually want to see transition and change. I'm not interested in hearing about it. Just do it. Show me. Don't tell me. Show me.
Okay, excellent. We'll come back to that. JP, what does the just transition mean to you? And then James, will come to yourself.
Well, it's a term I have come across a lot in the last years. And I think going into a greener economy, if it is happening, it's going to be over the course of decades, and we are changing the relationships between people and companies and governments and activities, and in that process, over the course of time, we have two situations. One is people that have a standard of living or a way of living now, and what they are going to be in the future, and people that are not living well now, if there is a possibility for them to be better in the future. And just a memory about this, a comment, because talking here in London, people talk about, okay, we need to stop flying to, for example, to Argentina because it's polluting the environment. But my immediate thought was, okay, no, don't stop, because we need the currency, we need foreign money. in order to buy, to develop our country. So if you stop traveling because you want to save the world, we are going to starve in Argentina. So this kind of balances of this transition, I think, is what we are addressing with a just transition.
Great, thank you for that, JP. James, how about yourself?
So for me, there are kind of like two sides to this. So like this is a very hot topic for again, like my kind of age group. And I feel like most people kind of focus on one aspect of it, which is, you know, what we can do personally, individually, to try and make a difference. And the theory is, if we all try and make a difference in our own personal lives, then that all adds up. Now, this is only one side of the story, unfortunately. In fact, the other side is that, you know, you've got all of these different incentives, this web of incentives between companies, governments, and all of these other things. And the issue is because at the end of the day, it's money that's the problem. You know, it's the fact that people are going to, like you said, there's a code of silence, and it's purely because a lot of our success and a lot of what we want in life, our ticket to what we want is money. And the point is, people see the money and they lose all of their rationality. And the thing is, like, it gives them the excuse to present to themselves to, you know, mine irresponsibly, to, you know, make a deal with a company in order, you know where I'm getting at with this. And I think that's the first and most important problem. I think until governments and governing bodies start changing that web of incentives to start benefiting, you know, us and the longevity of our planet, our species, nothing's really going to change. I think, you know, until there are proper hard incentives for companies to become, you know, carbon neutral, for example, or start reusing old tech or stuff like that, they're going to keep on chasing the money. They're going to keep on chasing the profit, and that's the first biggest problem. Now, after that, I think the responsibility then falls on us as individuals, because realistically, you know, we live lives of excessive consumerism, and it's, you know, you can't argue that that's good for the planet. But at the same time, it's just about thinking smart. It's about thinking, how can we reduce emission? And it's not an easy topic. It requires a lot of thought from a lot of experts in a lot of different categories. But we need to pull together. And we need to pull together pretty quickly, actually. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my perspective on it.
Great, thanks for that, James. So JP, maybe coming back to yourself. Given your interpretation of what you feel the just transition is, where do you think mining comes into that? What kind of role does mining have to play?
Oh, well, it's one like a really important sector in energy, and of course in emissions and etc. So yeah, adapting mining, and I think probably putting a cap on production and transforming and identifying what is necessary and how to yeah, I don't know if I want to retribute, so maintain the power relationships that we have now in the next greener economy, because I don't feel they are fair somehow. So yeah, probably it's like a sector that needs to be like controlled in somehow and reduced and transformed into different activities. And I think a lot of companies are starting to do that, and somehow start to work with stakeholders and communities and yeah, like melt down all the benefits from the activity into the wider network. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, JP. James, what do you think? And then I'll go to the just do it lady, to Veronique.
It's a really tricky question again. And I don't know enough about the mining industry to give like any advice on this topic, I'll be completely honest. But again, I think it just comes back to mining responsibly you know, not polluting the environment, taking only what's necessary, not like, for example, say you hit like a giant, you know, I don't know what it's called, say a cluster of diamonds, like you only take what you need. You don't take, you know, everything that you find, or you don't seek the profit again. And again, it comes back to what Veronique was saying. You don't exploit the local communities, and you don't create profit or, you know, profit or benefit for a different population at another population's expense. So yeah.
Great, thanks, James. Veronique, how about yourself?
I think James and JP have made some interesting points. Firstly, about capping, because my understanding is that this is a small planet and therefore these are finite resources. They will run out. We need alternatives. And I think mining companies have a lot of heft, and I think that they can significantly alter a country's GDP. And that means that they have a lot of influence, and how they use that influence, whether they use it for their own profit, as James was saying, or whether they actually use it to improve the place that they are in, is a big question for them. And it's a moral and ethical one, because it's not about making profit. And James is absolutely right when he says that our economic models are set up in such a way that we cannot really abandon the way that we are living without really quite a cataclysmic change. You know, I'm just as bad as everyone else. I'm talking to you on a laptop, so I can work from home. I've got a mobile phone, I've got a telly, you know, I've got all these things. So to a certain extent, me sitting here making no friends whatsoever is kind of rather hypocritical, because we all want cheap goods. As James said, we are consumed by consumerism. So I think there are political things that have to happen. I think there are economic things that have to happen. And then I think there are things that mining companies can do because of the amount of power and influence that they have, that they can actually bring it to bear. Whether they want to, or whether they will continue to chase the incentives and the profits, I think is another question. And I think if you went out and did a vox pop on the street, I think most people would tell you that they see mining companies as in it for the profit, and they don't give monkeys where it comes from. And that may be true, or it may not be, but that I think is probably quite a common perception. And this is why I have an issue with people using phrases and slogans and propaganda. It means nothing until you actually do it. Anyone, you know, I can come up with a nice slogan that would sound amazing, but if I don't do anything about it, then it's just words, you know. And so I think actually, to use probably a phrase that maybe is slightly maladapted to this, I think they have to put their money where their mouth is.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Veronique.
No problem.
I've got two more questions for all of you, and the first one, I will apologize in advance. It's a horrible question, and you can certainly pass on this if you really want to. Okay, we've been asking a number of people this question over the course of the past week, and also building up to this event, and it's been creating a bit of a stir. So cobalt is one of those materials that we need in things like our mobile phones, in batteries, etc. The vast majority of the world's cobalt currently comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and some of that is mined by 9-year-olds. Okay, so if you had the choice, now you have to buy cobalt. Okay, so these are the rules of this game. Okay, you have to buy cobalt, and you can only buy this cobalt from one of two sources, either a 9-year-old or deep sea mining. Which do you go for? So you have to buy the cobalt, and you can only buy it from a 9-year-old or deep sea mining. Now, I told you this was a horrible question, and I'm going to go with James first, because James is looking at me like, I'm going to wriggle here. On you go, James. What do you think?
What are the ramifications of deep sea mining first?
So go with your knowledge of deep sea mining at the moment, if anything.
Absolutely zero, I'm afraid.
Okay.
I mean, it's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one. I'm going to assume, by the nature of the question, that deep sea mining is detrimental to the environment. And I mean, I'd propose the argument. I mean, I used to be a A-level philosophy student. Topshop. Like most of your shirts are probably made by a 9-year-old, you know, somewhere in Eastern Asia. You're just not aware of it. Or in fact, you probably are aware because you've seen that on the news somewhere. But in fact, because you're, you know, just trapped in these cycles of consumerism, you've kind of pushed it right to the back of your head, and you're not really thinking about it. So, I mean, it just comes back to the question, like, what's the greater good? And you know, if you were to take a philosophical approach and say you are what's the word? There's a specific word for it. Okay, I'm going to move on because I know that we're on a time limit, but that's going to really bug me. That's good. Okay, I'll come back. But essentially, it comes back to what's the greater good, and say, if it means that you can prolong the longevity of our environment and won't corrupt the environment, then yes, I'd probably go for the 9-year-old, just purely because, like, if, like, you know, it's not as linear, because if you destroy the entire globe, and I know this is probably very controversial, then there will be no more 9-year-olds. But you know, it doesn't make either of them a very favorable choice. And yeah, probably shouldn't have answered the question because I might get cancelled for it, but we'll see.
No, brilliant. Thank you very much for that, James, because this is a horrible question. So my apologies for asking it. And everybody can pass on it. But James, thank you so much for taking us through your thinking with regards to that. And you can see how uncomfortable it makes us all feel. JP, how about yourself?
Well, the idealist way of solving this question would be not needing to buy the mineral, saying I don't solving that part, but I understand that this is, and sometimes when you are in government or you have to make decisions, and also in companies or big companies or etc. And so you have to decide one or the other. And I think the solution is you can take either of the two, but the point is, as Veronique said, not what you decide of the two, but what you are doing to change it. So you may go for, okay, I go for the 9-year-old, but I'm working to transform this situation in this way, you know, or I'm going for the mines, sea mining, but I know that in 10 years with this plan in place, this is not going to happen. So if you have to choose a bad thing to do, you have to also find a way to get out of the trap. And I think that's what I would say. I would go for either or half and half, but always with a plan to how to stop doing it.
Great. Thank you very much for that, JP. And Veronique, how about yourself?
I think they're both abhorrent options, and I'd rather go without a mobile phone. I really would. Simple. Unless you want me to really, if you really sort of saying, no, that's not the rules of the game, but I would actually just say I don't want a mobile phone ever again. I'm fine.
Okay, excellent. You can take that option. That's brilliant. Thank you. And thank you all of you for having the guts and the courage, to be honest, to go near that. Because again, in this world, and as you were saying, James, earlier on, it can be very difficult to actually work through some of these really difficult conversations, especially in public, like we're doing at the moment, because we know that neither is the right answer, especially when we're saying this out there in the world. So final question. Sorry, on you go, James.
Well, firstly, I didn't know there was a third option.
I always try for a third option, even if there's not one, James. It's just I can't help myself. Sarah knows this.
Trying to trick me into that one, Sarah. Secondly, it was utilitarianism. Whoever posted that in the chat, well done. Full marks to you. Yeah, I'm kicking myself for not thinking of it, but yeah.
Brilliant. No, thank you very much for that, James. So final question before we wrap up. So if you listening into this very intently, you've got a range of people. You've got people who work for mining companies. You've got investors who invest in mining companies. You have members of government who write all the policy with regards to all of this. You've got people who work for anti-mining groups as well. So we've got people who come at the mining sector from very different angles, including people who design the batteries, etc. So what kind of technology do we need, and people who design recycling processes as well. What final message would you like to leave all of these people with? Do you have a final message, a final request perhaps to send to the mining sector as a whole? Veronique, what do you think? And then we'll go to JP.
I think I would say to mining corporations, you have a huge amount of heft and power and influence. You should use it properly and for the good of people, because what you're doing, you're arguing that mining is necessary for the good of people. So make it for the good of everybody.
Brilliant. Thank you. JP, how about yourself? And then we'll finish with James.
Yes, in the same line, it's like you can do a lot of money to helping people and caring about the environment. That's at this time of history, one thing doesn't exclude the other. So you can make a massive amount of money and you can care about the people and the planet. And it's not about because another thing of this last couple of years is putting the pressure in the consumer and saying you don't use a cell phone, so that you now feel responsible for all this massive problem, you know. And also is who is in the position to change this? Big companies, governments, and we can be a part of that movement, but it's not our fault. So yeah, use your power and your influence and change this.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, JP. And James.
I think where I kind of want to leave the discussion is you kind of need to understand human psychology to kind of tackle this problem. Like, I think there's a common theme popping up here, and that's kind of like, it's the code of silence. It's, you know, it's the fact that we're all kind of aware of what's looming in the future, but we like, have you ever watched the film Don't Look Up? Like this tackles the topic perfectly, right? It's kind of like we'd rather live in blissful ignorance than just, you know, shut up and face reality. And I think this question should lie on the shoulders of the people who kind of have the most power in terms of making decisions. Like, you know, if you are one of those people and you do have the choice, right, and you're being irresponsible purely for making money, you need to like sit down and take a long look in the mirror. Like, you really need to understand yourself and break down your own psychology, because you are destroying the future for all of our future generations. We've lived for thousands of years and you're destroying something which is so precious, really. So, I mean, there's a good book about this kind of stuff as well. It's called The Trick. Again, breaks down the psychology of money. And I think if everyone understood the psychology of money, then I think we'd all be better faced and better equipped to tackle this problem. But yeah, I think that's kind of where I want to leave it.
Brilliant. So thank you so much, James. So James, JP, Veronique, thank you so much for joining us here for this session just now. I think what you have shared with us is incredibly precious. Thank you so much for being so honest and courageous, to be honest, in terms of sharing your perspectives with us here today. On behalf of everybody, a massive round of applause. Thank you very much. You can hear everybody clapping behind their muted microphones. Fantastic, great.